afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are watching us from and the time you are watching this courtroom series. Welcome to today's episode. Today I have here Mr. Walter Awala, a level 300 student, law student of the University of Professional Studies Accra, and today he will be here with us to discuss on the protection of human rights in our Ghanaian society. Mr. Walter, please, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Precious. I'm very privileged to have been called upon to share my insights on the Voice of UPSA courtroom series, and I look forward to a fruitful discussion.
Okay, so without wasting much of our viewers' time, we want to actually dive into human rights. When we say human rights, what does it entail? And then where can we say that a person's human rights has been infringed upon?
Right. So human rights basically the privileges that every human being enjoys by virtue of the fact that that person is a human being, right? And so human rights is a creation of law. And when I say human rights is a creation of law, I mean that unless a state actually makes laws to actually protect human rights, then there are no human rights. And if you look at historical background, um, looking at the 1957 Constitution, 1960 Constitution, there were no protection of fundamental human rights until 1969 and 1979, and the current 1992 Constitution that has actually made provision for fundamental human rights. And so, human rights is a creation of law, which means that unless the state makes legislation to protect human rights, then there's no human rights. Yes.
So moving on to our second question, I want to ask how are human rights only applied to a category of people or everybody is entitled to human rights?
Right. And so human rights are supposed to be enjoyed by everyone. And as I intimated earlier, human rights rights that a person enjoys by virtue of the fact that that person is a human being, right? And so when you look at Article 12, Clause 1 of the 1992 Constitution of Ghana, it guarantees that every person has rights, and irrespective of whether the person is a citizen of Ghana or not, that person is supposed to be protected, or the right of that particular person is supposed to be protected under our Ghanaian laws. And so you do not need to be from Ghana, or human right does not actually protect a certain category of people, but then everyone is supposed to be protected under our human rights regime in Ghana. Yes.
Okay. So in recent times, we've actually heard many cases of people saying that their human rights have been infringed upon, and we actually attest to the fact that there are certain things that have been put in place to protect these human rights of these kind of people. So why is human rights actually important in our Ghanaian society like that?
Right. And so one of the importance of human rights is to actually protect the vulnerable groups, right? Specifically women, children, and then disabled persons, right? So human rights are there to actually safeguard these individuals in our society. And so when you take the 1992 Constitution, for instance, it has human rights on natural rights, social rights, economic rights, and as well as legal rights. And so human rights is there to protect the vulnerable groups as well as each and every one within the society. Yes.
So moving on to our last question, which agencies or which category of people can we actually go to when our human rights are being infringed upon?
Yes, so under our Ghanaian jurisprudence, there are institutions that are put in place to actually safeguard and protect fundamental human rights. And one of the primary institutions is the court. And under Article 33 of the 1992 Constitution of Ghana, if a person's rights or fundamental human rights has been actually infringed upon, that person has the right to invoke the jurisdiction of the High Court to enforce his or her fundamental human rights. And there has been a plethora of Ghanaian decisions that have actually stated that before an individual can actually invoke the High Court jurisdiction to enforce human rights, that person must have a personal interest in that particular matter, which means you must be a victim of the infringement. And so, for example, if your son your son's right has been infringed upon. The proper person to actually invoke the High Court's jurisdiction is your son and not the parent. And so when you read the case of Edusei number 2 versus Attorney General, as well as Psalm number 2 verses Attorney General. All these cases are set that before an individual can actually invoke the original jurisdiction of the High Court in respect of fundamental human rights, that person has to have a personal interest in that particular matter, right? And also, it is important to add that we all enjoy fundamental human rights. However, there are limitations to this right. And under Article 12, Clause 2 of the 1992 Constitution, it provides that in the enjoyment of our fundamental human rights, we must take due regard to the right of other persons or interests of other persons. And so while you are enjoying your right, make sure not to trample on another person's right. Right. And so this particular issue, or this the concept of balancing of rights, or the act of balancing of rights. And Puaman JSC, in the case of Raphael Kubaji and Asari, actually stated that it is important to strike a balance between the enjoyment of our rights as well as respecting the right of others. Yes. And so one of the institutions is the court. And another institution that is actually in place to protect human rights or fundamental human rights is SRAJ. That's the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice. And this particular institution has been guaranteed under Chapter 18 of the 1992 Constitution. And what SRAD does is that it receives complaints of alleged human rights violations. And when these human rights violations are actually received by SRAD makes investigations on them. And it's important to note that SRAD is not a court. It's just a quasi-judicial body, right? And so when SRAD comes out with its recommendations or its decisions, right, SRAD has to go to the High Court or go to the court to enforce its decision in the event that the parties do not comply with the investigations, right? And so another institution is SRAD. Yes, so basically it is the court and then SRAD and other institutions that help protect fundamental human rights in Ghana. And then also we have the DOFSU, that's the Domestic Violence and Victim Support Unit. All these are institutions that are in place to actually safeguard fundamental human rights in our Ghanaian jurisprudence. Yes.
So you heard it from here. In your quest to enjoy your own human rights, make sure you don't trample over somebody else's human right. So today we come to the end of another episode of the Courtroom series. I want to thank our guests for actually coming today. It's a wonderful discussion that we've had with you. Thank you so much. Until we meet again, bye.